So what can we do? So at this point, I got invited to give a talk in Estonia, in Tallinn, and they were doing a cybersecurity summer school. It was a week-long program. They had students from all over the world come over there. And the theme for that year was social engineering. And I was blown away. I said, how did I not think about this? Right. And so it was brilliant. They were doing all sorts of cool things, right? They were doing shoulder surfing. They were doing.
So like CTFs, is that right?
It wasn't so much a CTF, like a full-fledged CTF, but they just had like these different activities that students could try out. It wasn't called a CTF, but I guess you could say, it falls under that category. And, just doing like calling people up and doing just essentially vishing for information. And I said, wow, wake up, Aunshul. You need to get your act together. And this was completely non-technical. And I said, all right, and you get your inspiration in the least expected of places. This was not, I think like the stars aligned. It was meant to happen. I was supposed to be there. Right. And I came back and I said, okay, I'm going to implement this in my classroom. So I had to come up with a description because it has to get vetted by our ethics board. And usually when I submit anything to the ethics board, it goes to review and I get an approval or a modifications request, whatever. This time I submitted it and they called and they're like, what are you trying to do? And I was like, why is it? And it's like, you can't just do this. This is problematic. And I said, well, what? And so it got into, well, you can't just call people up and do this. That's unethical. We're going to get sued. It's going to violate terms and conditions for any, product or whatever that we use. And I was like, oh my, okay. But and this was another sort of learning moment for me, right? So not only was I, okay, I need to up my game, but also how do I bake ethics into cybersecurity education? And I think that's something that, we need to talk about a lot more, and maybe we can revisit that later as we're talking. But it took me 8 months to get approved.
Wow. Because
we went constantly back and forth, like, what can I do? What can I not do? And so people are like, oh, when I just talk about the projects, people don't know the effort that went behind it. And there's a lot of, I had to connect with the ethics board. I had to go through risk management, make sure the projects were contained on campus so that our students weren't going places and doing things that would put them in danger because you're dealing with, right? So it's very different when you're training students versus when you're training working professionals. But the good news is I had a good group of people that got what I was trying to do, right? And they made it work. And so we started doing these projects in classrooms. So we started doing like shoulder surfing.
So there was another instance of the honey pot, okay, again, where you have the bait. So he has someone sitting down, someone from a rival team come to show that he's got somebody else, right? So he's bragging. And that's when they get him.
We did this really cool project where I gave all the students this absolutely silly prop, like a squeaking rubber chicken. And they had to go convince someone with a good pretext or a good backstory for why they were, walking around with this chicken. But the ultimate objective was getting someone to do a group selfie with you. And of course, the prop, the rubber chicken. But how were you going to convince someone to do that?
So for our first thing, we did frat boy pledging. Justin's going to be the pledge, and his pledge is that he has to get selfies with people holding the rubber chicken. Walking down the street, and you keep asking everybody you see, and then eventually, if you're lucky and persistent, you reach 2 nice people who say yes. So Justin brought those people back to just in front of the Bell Center, and we explained that he was pledging and that we needed to get a selfie with the rubber chicken, and here we go. We got our selfie. Mission accomplished.
It's harmless in the sense that you're not getting information or you're not getting access to a restricted area or anything like that. But the concept is still there. How do I convince you to do something for me, right? So we had to sort of change the scope a little bit, but the concept of it stayed the same. So we started doing that. We did, privacy terms and conditions projects. So we all know that everybody reads those, right? The privacy. Yeah, of course, no problem. And so then students had to come up with a fake product or service, and they had to go on campus and convince people to sign off for this product or service, but they had to agree to terms and conditions. And unlike the real ones that are out there that are pages and pages and pages long, this was just a one pager. And somewhere in there, they had to embed a really silly sentence like, I plan to howl at the moon every midnight, or, things that, but they had to embed it in there. And then they had to go and convince someone to sign off on this, right? So
just some random person on campus.
Just random person on campus.
Wow.
That's it. Once they signed off, which they almost always did, they then had to disclose, right, that this is fake, this is for a class project. And then they had to interview them to ask them, hey, well, why did you sign up for this? Right. So one project alone did three things. One was you were coming up with your sort of game plan and actually trying to develop that adversarial mindset, right? How do I go and convince you to do something? Part two was the ethical component, the disclosure. Part three was they became researchers and got to understand the reasoning behind this, right? Why they signed up for it. And when students what I do is I just set the scope, right? I'm like, here's what you can and can't do. And make sure, everything's ethical. If you're not sure, run things by me. But you have complete creative freedom in terms of what pretext you want to develop. How are you going to do this? All of those kinds of, and I've found that when they have that creative freedom, they get so excited about it. It's very empowering. And then they come back and be like, hey, did you know that this works really well, right? And they all sort of share these moments in the classroom. So we've done pretexting, we've done shoulder surfing, and of course then the pandemic happened. So we switched to phishing, vishing, open source intelligence. And it's gotten to a point now where the ethics board, when I submit an application, they're like, oh, it's Aunshul's, who wants to take this one, right? Because it's always going to be different. It's going to, but it really does take so many people behind the scenes. So yes, I sort of offer these projects, but your ethics board is so important. Your risk management unit is so important, and there's a lot of people behind the scenes. So those were some projects that we did. And these are, by the way, available for free for download, if your viewers are interested in that. And so we've had educators obviously use this, but we've had students who've come and say, hey, we run cybersecurity clubs. Can we take some of your projects? I'm like, absolutely. We've had industry and government request these projects because they're trying to step away from doing online quizzes for cybersecurity training. And they also find that this builds a lot of bonding moments between, colleagues. So I thought that was really cool. So we started doing that. And then fast forward a bit, I started going to conferences and talking about these. Right? Class projects. And I had so many students reach out to me after I gave the talk, and they came up and they said, hey, this is really cool. I wish we had something like this, where I'm at. Do you do CTFs? And I said, no. And this is what I mean. Inspiration comes from, it was the very audience, the community that I'm serving that came up to me and gave me that idea. And they said, can you do CTFs? And I was like, oh, okay, let me go think about that. And so, of course, the next hard part was trying to find partners to do this, because you are literally looking at a one-woman team, right? And I said, okay, I really need to find people. And I pitched this to a couple of different folks who will remain unnamed. But, it came back, I was like, yeah, no, this is not going to fly. This is not going to work. And I'm used to hearing that. And that's okay. I asked, didn't get. So I said, okay, I'm going to try my own thing. And I finally found a partner with the Layer 8 conference. And for those of you who are into social engineering and open source intelligence, you should definitely check them out. It's happening in Rhode Island this October. But, I went up to Patrick Collaborative, who's one of the co-organizers, and I said, hey, what do you think? Do you want to do this with me? And he said, all right. And it was literally just like that. And we hosted our first collegiate social engineering capture the flag in October of 2020, which was really, really cool. And we had predominantly computer science teams submit applications. Like I'd say 98% of the applications were from computer science students, which was interesting to me, right? Because I wanted to create something that was open to everybody. A lot of the technical competitions are not for everyone, right? They're not inclusive of all fields. And I wanted to create something where I could have not just technical students, because they need to learn about this too, of course, but someone who's a drama major or someone who's a music major, they could try their hand at this because, again, cybersecurity isn't optional anymore. It impacts everybody. So we did have one psychology team compete, which was really cool. And the event was a success, So we had obviously Layer 8 as our co-organizers, but we also brought members from the professional social engineering community to serve as judges, right? And so they were also engaging with the students, which was really, really nice. So they took time out of their schedules to make this happen. And then, I said, well, this is great, right? It worked. Then I started getting emails from educators for K through 12. And they said, and they said, do you have anything like this for high school students? Now, I only work in the higher ed space. So I said, I don't, but let me go think about this. Plus, now we're getting into working with minors, which raises a whole bunch of other, concerns. I also had graduate students reach out and say, well, why is this only for undergrads? We want to do this too.